Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. Today I want to talk about why psychotherapy is a myth. This also includes hypnotherapy, by the way. So both psychotherapy and hypnotherapy is a myth. Notice I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm saying that it's a myth. Or I should modify my statement a little bit. It is almost always a myth. Now, what do I mean by this? Because colleagues, people I know, people who work with clients, claim to be doing therapy. They talk about treatment. They talk about mental illness. But here's the thing. A brain can be sick. A mind cannot be sick because it's a non-existent entity. So a brain as a physical organ can be sick. You can have cancer of the brain. You could have Alzheimer's. You could have epilepsy or multiple sclerosis. So if you used psychological means to, for example, change a tumor or to help someone create a remission from multiple sclerosis, that would qualify as psychotherapy. But the thing is that almost no one in the field of psychotherapy or hypnotherapy claim to actually do that. They talk about treating mental illnesses. But the thing is, a mind is a non-existent entity. A non-existent entity cannot, per definition, be sick. You can't even find a mind. I challenge you to try to locate your mind anywhere. See if you can find a mind. Now, there's being, obviously. If you take the simple phrase, I am, this you can verify in your experience, I am. If you take the utterance I am and you trace it back to the experience that it refers to, you'll find being itself. Being itself has no objective qualities. It doesn't start anywhere. It doesn't stop. It's not located. It doesn't have a weight. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a form. So being itself cannot be sick. Only a body can be sick, and that includes a brain. Now, if we talk about a mind, if you try to find a mind, you can find no such thing. Mind is a verb, not a noun. It's the process of minding, attending, intending, meaning making, right? So there's perceptions, there's sensations, there's thinking, there's feeling. These are processes and activities. A thought cannot be sick. A feeling cannot be sick. A perception or a sensation can obviously not be sick. I'm not doubting that people are suffering. I see suffering people every day, but this idea of therapy and treatment and mental illness is a complete misnomer. Using those metaphors actually makes helping people more difficult because instead of in addition to the thoughts and the feelings and the unskillful relationship to it, there's suddenly this implied disease entity that has to be treated with some sort of method. And this is all a myth. So consider this. Let's say that you owned a car and that every time you got into your car, you ended up in locations where you didn't like being. Or every time you went for a car, you ended up in the ditch, right? Now, the fact that you end up in locations you don't like being does not in of itself constitute evidence that there's something wrong with the engine of the car or the car itself. You may just suck at driving. or you might need some better decision making. You're not necessarily going to need a mechanic to fix your car, but you might need a driving instructor or a good tour guide to navigate things better. So, in the same way, if you find yourself behaving in ways you don't like a lot of the time, that does not in of itself provide evidence that there's something wrong with your brain. Any more that the fact that you end up in parts of town you don't like when you go for a drive necessarily means that there's something wrong with the car or the engine itself. Now, there might be something wrong with the car. For example, if you crash into a tree every time because you don't have any brakes, that's something that a mechanic could help you fix. But in most instances, there's probably nothing wrong with the car. So what you might want is a tour guide, not a mechanic. Or consider, and this is another analogy I got from Thomas Sauce, who also, by the way, wrote a book called The Myth of Psychotherapy. He had this other nice analogy as well, which I got reminded of a couple of weeks back when I was doing a presentation at the UK Hypnosis Convention in London. I was in bed at night flipping channels on the TV. And I just had this thought, all these channels and nothing decent to watch. Like there's just junk and rubbish, right, on all the TV channels. Now imagine how nutty it would be to conclude that because all the various programs on the different TV channels are crap, according to me, that's evidence that there has to be something wrong with the TV. That what I really need is a TV repairman to fix the TV, because if only the TV gets fixed, surely better TV programs, series, and movies and documentaries will appear on the various channels. This is a bit the type of nutty thinking that's being displayed when people say, look, if the movie is in your mind, so to speak, if your thought patterns, if your internal dialogue, if your feeling states are crappy in a sense, not something you like, there's just bad movies on all the channels, that has to mean that there's something wrong with your brain. Now, there could be something wrong with the TV itself, if there's a lot of static or the signal is kind of bad. But for the most part, you cannot use poor movies or series as evidence that there's something wrong with the TV. In the same way, you cannot use behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that are unwanted as evidence that you somehow have a disease. So what you might look for then is someone who can either help you create better movies in the mind, change what you think or how you think, or even better, change the relationship to your thoughts and your feelings. But this isn't therapy. This is psychoeducation or skills training or being a guide that helps someone discover insights into the nature of thought. Or you might help someone discover that instead of it being a screen that you watch as a spectator from the distance, you might help someone discover that despite the shitty programming, the nature of being or mind itself is peace, right? That fundamentally we are the consciousness or the invisible screen that all the movies and the scenes appear on or are expressions of. Being able to knowingly be the screen that all the movies are an expression of is also a way to help us to recognize the peaceful nature of what we are, even if the world and the activity of minding seems turbulent for the moment being. So be careful with your metaphors. You know, when people use terms like mental illness and treatment and therapy, they're either misguided, like they never bothered to really think things through, or they're using these terms in metaphorical ways without necessarily being explicit that they are doing so, right? So let's say that someone, a hot woman walks by, and I say to you, man, she's a knockout. That's a metaphor. It's not meant literally. Or let's say that someone's moving up the career ladder. You might say that he's moving up, or she's a warm person, or she's a cold person. These are metaphors, right? So be aware of the metaphors that you are using. Remember that we understand words in terms of frames and metaphors, and that these frames and metaphors deeply influence how we make sense out of things. And I'm fully convinced that the notions of treatment and therapy and cure and mental illness makes it a lot more difficult to help people than it otherwise would be if we used more appropriate terms such as psychoeducation or skills training. The book I mentioned, by the way, by Thomas Sauce, The Myth of Psychotherapy, is also a very good read if you want to do a deep dive into the effects of the way we use metaphors. Consider a final example. If we look at things like autoimmune diseases, chronic pain, all sorts of stuff, these are conditions where people almost never apply psychotherapy, even though it would be a really good idea to do so. Why? Because the main metaphor in medicine is the body as a machine. Now, if you operate from a body as a machine metaphor, it makes sense to cut, to drug, to do surgery, to essentially wheel the body part, into the operating table, or to wheel the car into the garage. Stuff like thoughts, meaning, subjectivity, relationships really finds no home within that metaphor. And there's also a big mind-body split presupposed instead of acknowledging that what we call mind and body is an integrated system, and that we as organisms are not fundamentally separate from the environment in which we live. So I'm a big fan of real psychotherapy, meaning if someone has an autoimmune disease, or if someone has cancer or diabetes, exploring how psychological interventions, which are still physiological, of course, also in nature and relational and contextual, how doing work in that realm can influence our physiology. That's the domain of real psychotherapy, and I'm all for it. But virtually no one who practices psychotherapy really practices psychotherapy. What they're doing is they're essentially travel guides, not mechanics. They're essentially software designers, not TV repairmen. So anyways, if you have any comments on this, feel free to leave them where you find the video. If you like my way of thinking, know that my next Psychological Illusion Model 2.0 seminar is going to be in Iceland, January 14th and 15th, 2023. Go to provocativehypnosis.com on the seminar page for more information. And of course, if you would like not psychotherapy, but some good psychoeducation and skill training to help you make a change, you can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. Thanks for listening.